Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report podcast. I'm your host, Vago Muradian. Our podcast is brought to you by Bell. Since 1935, Bell has been redefining flight. Learn more about its pioneering spirit at bellflight.com. Joining us now is Dave Bujold, the director of the MQ-25 Stingray program at Boeing Defense, Space and Security. He's a retired U.S. Air Force colonel who is overseeing a program to develop an autonomous tanker aircraft that can operate off of U.S. Navy aircraft carriers. We spoke to Dave before Boeing announced 6,000 job cuts in the wake of plunging commercial aircraft traffic and dropping commercial aircraft sales. Dave, thanks very much for joining us.
Vago, thank you very much for having me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation with you and the viewer.
Absolutely. It's fascinating what you guys are trying to achieve with the MQ-25 program, which is to put an autonomous aerial refueling capability on a carrier deck. Before we get started, our global coverage is sponsored by Leonardo DRS. Northrop Grumman sponsors our weekly cyber report and cyber coverage overall. Fincantieri Marinette Marine sponsors our naval coverage, and Elbit Systems of America is sponsoring our virtual coverage of Quad A and SOFIC. And of course, Bell sponsors this podcast. The coronavirus pandemic has taken a toll on everybody, on Boeing as well, including the brief shutting down of production facilities for disinfectioning and restructuring lines. You're running a program that was awarded in 2018 to deliver an initial capability next year on a very, very ambitious schedule. How's coronavirus affected your program so far?
Like all of the defense industry, we've moved to a telecommuting presence very significantly in March. We've been doing that now for several weeks. Over 90% of my team is working virtually, consistent with the rest of Boeing Defense. Our supply chain, same, but as you point out, there are certainly some business critical functions that you just have to do at the factory, our team included. And the effect there is to just turn on the safeguards and really be people focused, appropriate protective equipment, keeping the social distance and getting the deep cleaning where it needs to be for that. So the transition was, as many have pointed out, that transition has been surprisingly smooth, and I'm real proud of our team. Their can-do attitude just went right to the telecommuting place, and very fortunate that we're making hay to go.
First aircraft was certified by the Federal Aviation Administration last year. That cleared you to begin flight testing in September. Bring us up to speed on where you guys are on this program. Again, awarded in 2018, you're supposed to deliver capability next year. Bring us up to speed on where you guys are.
You're right. Prior to program award, we invested in a very high fidelity aircraft, MQ-25. We call it T1. It's under FAA experimental. Our plan all along, while we were in a typical development program, your critical path is to, you go through the design phase, you go out and procure your parts, assemble, and then get on with the flight test era on your way to IOC. We had the luxury, if you want to call it that, of leveraging this first article T1. We have a planned campaign of flight test. The objective of that campaign of flight test is to do early testing, surrogate testing for the EMD aircraft. So while our FAA certified aircraft doesn't have war-fighting requirements, that you would need for coming aboard the carrier, from an aeronautical engineering perspective and from a flying qualities perspective, it's a twin, and we're really proud of that. And it's really given us an opportunity to get on with testing. We flew our first, test campaign from a envelope expansion standpoint. We are now, and truly a coincidence, as the coronavirus activities came upon us, we had just prior to that intentionally put the plane down for some updates and modifications to beef up the left wing and be ready to host the air refueling pod on the T1 asset. We're wrapping that up. We're 80% through that, and we'll be back flying again later this year with the aircraft. We have a third period where we'll come down intentionally and incorporate all the JPALs and other features that'll again allow us to go back in the air with T1. And that's in parallel, not in series, with the the build, so that when we get done with a lot of that T1 flying, we'll be looking at combat designed jets on the ramp and be able to just leapfrog right to that flight testing.
And so far, no schedule impacts as a result of all of this?
And you mean as a result of all the COVID, or as a
Correct.
result of just this? Yeah.
Well, both.
No,
both.
we have not.
Both.
Yeah, correct. We have not seen schedule impacts due to COVID pleasantly. I think the timeline of the start of the program, as you pointed out, at the end of 2018, and our ability, to get all the way through 2019 as a team working with our Navy partners, really got our battle rhythm where it needed to be, so that when we transitioned to telecommuting, we transitioned with a team that was, that was already very accustomed to working together on our statement of work. So that transition was straightforward. The other thing that was, just again, a coincidence of timing, we were about a week and a half out back in March of our design review with our Navy customer, fully planned to be a face-to-face meeting, lots of folks on airplane coming to see us, above and beyond the normal team that's always with us. That shifted virtually. Obviously there were some worry beads as that happened. Real proud to say it went off without a hitch. We were fortunate, we've got the technology to do, this type of voice meeting and present material, and the customer was, super pleased with how that all turned out. And we got through that review. So no schedule impacts at all to date.
The program was an incredibly important win for Boeing at a time when there were a couple of setbacks. It was in the wake of the bomber loss. You guys were partnered, obviously, with Lockheed Martin on that one. But this is also a fixed price program at $2.1 billion through 2021. And one of the challenges with fixed price programs, as we've seen on KC-46 and other efforts, is that can kind of become problematic and the company ends up eating a lot of cost. Where are you guys on this from a budget standpoint? Because it's important to execute, but anything you go over, you're the ones who've got to take care of that overage.
Well, so you're correct. Fixed price development, we're in that new era. I will tell you that the fixed price development process, working with our Navy teammate in this context, is, deserves and requires a lot of attention to detail. We've certainly, from day one, taken very seriously how we expend budget against the statement of work. We have found that we are able to maintain to our budget that we set and report to those standards. And so far, we've had certainly events and situations where individual cost line items have gone up, but we've also captured lots of opportunities. And I think it really focuses the dialogue between the customer and the company. And so far, so good. And from my experience, if you operate even a cost plus program in a fixed price mentality, you have a healthier program. So from my experience, this has been a healthier program because we've certainly stayed focused on the cost without sacrificing the requirements. And that's the key, because if you sacrifice a requirement, that'll come back to haunt you. So we've been very conscious about that.
And the Navy was very thoughtful, right? I mean, each one of the competitors was given a design contract beforehand, and you guys did quite a lot of work so that the Navy had a greater degree of fidelity before it picked any of the competitors, to sort of identify issues and get everybody's mind wrapped around the problems. How many aircraft are you guys delivering under this contract? Just so to clarify for our audience, so they know, hey, the first airplane is being delivered, but how many are in this first initial batch?
So on this initial batch, and one of the things, just to point out for your last question too, in that concept refinement phase, one of the great advantages was the Navy identified, just as if it's easy to say, these, just 2 key performance parameters, which really focuses the team, integrate with the carrier and give the fuel offload. All other things are subordinate to those 2 KPPs, and we really appreciate that simplicity. Now, on the program, we're developing and delivering 4 test assets, 2 ground assets, and then the 3 option aircraft that the Navy recently awarded us. So a total of 7 flying and 2 ground test assets.
And eventually, the Navy would like how many of these airplanes? Ballpark.
We'd love them to say unlimited, but I think that the plan right now is in the ballpark of I believe 70 plus in that area.
I've got a couple of more questions for you downstream about how this program is paving the way for the future, which I think sometimes people don't realize the trailblazing nature of this. You mentioned what Hondo Gertz, the Navy acquisition executive, is very fond of always saying, which is programs got 2 requirements: carry gas and be able to operate off an aircraft carrier. But it's significantly more complicated than that, given that, one of those, land on the carrier part of it, naval aviation requirements are incredibly precise. And the challenges are really multifold, because you guys are a longtime supplier in naval aircraft, so you guys are comfortable with that. But walk us through all of the other subordinate requirements, because what this airplane, it's one thing to have an X-47 that lands and takes off from a carrier. It's another for that aircraft to autonomously operate in the carrier-controlled airspace, which is extremely tight and extremely crowded. And another thing to be able to do cyclic operations off of a very crowded flight deck, right? In a test cycle, everybody can be standing aside, but anybody who's shot 80 airplanes off a carrier deck knows that is a Swiss watch precision evolution. Otherwise, everything gets derailed. So talk to us about some of the other requirements that are within these requirements that are going to determine whether this program is a success or not.
Absolutely. You've said it well. I mean, the impressive ability to turn air power off these ships is just, it always catches everybody with the ingenuity, the professionalism. So one of the key ones, and you highlighted it, one of our key requirements derived, if you will, from the suitability with the carrier, and certainly something our whole team is cognizant of, because we've leveraged a lot of the Super Hornet FAA team in terms of carrier suitability. But one of those key items which we're proud of is, as I tell my team, we're not here to issue the Navy how to operate on a carrier. We're here to operate on a carrier the way the Navy operates aircraft on a carrier, which is really, with autonomy, which is really a great lens, because we've already seen glimmers of this working with our T1 aircraft. When T1 first taxied down the taxiway and was on the hold line for its first flight, at the airport we were operating at, another airplane landed, and they literally, because we had a safety vehicle nearby, they were looking right at the airplane and talking about the airplane in the first person. For them, it was a manned aircraft. We want that same philosophy. So when we move on the deck and when we get to the catapult and when we get into that airspace, it's got to be a seamless transition. And the only difference is that our pilot is in the control room, but when he keys the mic, the system thinks he's right there on the airplane. And that's the main thing. We're not issuing new doctrine. We want to use the same, tried and true training of the deck handling team and the team on top side, and as well as in the maintenance hangars everywhere throughout. And it's been our goal, and it's been the smart way to approach it, and we're real pleased with how that's going. So that's the perfect example of what you're asking about.
Service leaders are very proud of saying that this program is going to change the way the Navy buys aircraft. You guys are moving at astonishing speed. You're trying to, as you said, don't pare back on requirements when you have a challenge. Kind of think your way through the problem. How is, you're an airplane guy of the first order. You spent a number of years of your career at Northrop, so you've got Boeing pollination as well as another company's genes in there a little bit. How is this program changing the game of developing complex trailblazing systems?
I think a couple things, right? We talked about, for sure, the change is, really keep the requirements creep from from happening, right? So the key performance parameters, lens, right there, you know, if and when we have a conversation, we don't have a conversation that begins and ends in the weeds. We always look at it through the lens of those two KPPs, because, you know, at the end of the day, IOC is going to be driven by whether we perform to those. And if there's any conversation with our Navy customer, we want it to be through that lens, and so do they. So that to me is an enormous evolution in procurement, and I think a healthy one. And it's also a healthy evolution in procurement from a fixed price development standpoint, because you know that chase of that last, you know, that last degree of temperature, or that chase of that last sink rate catch is really got to be through that lens of those KPPs, and that's been great. The other big change, and it's evolved in this telecommuting era, as you would imagine. The NavAir team is PMA 268 is our program office. Captain Reed and his people are with us, and up till coronavirus, at least a handful, up to 24 people with us at the Boeing facility embedded. No meeting closed, a real transparent interchange. They're very up to speed, and they're empowered while they're here. So the ability for us to go to them and say, hey, we want to do this, and we want to make sure you see it as tied to the requirement or the drive requirement, and understand it as we go through it, and we document that with them, so that we don't create a future that says, why are you doing it that way? You know, we've really got that transparency up. And then the third piece, which I think is a super benefit, and our T7 team here at Boeing has the same benefit, and that's having that test asset available while the team is in development of the combat capable asset. It's huge early learning, if you will. It's certainly a rally point. The team gets to see the airplane in action. You get to actually walk up to the airplane and really, you know, while we've got an enormous amount of model-based engineering work going on, which is really enabling this, and you can really fly into the airplane through your computer. It also helps to be able to physically walk up to the exact scale. So those are the attributes, and our Navy customer is really focused on tying all of our out to that IOC date. Our goal is to try to beat it, but you know, certainly we're meeting it is very, very much in our wheelhouse. So we're excited.
And what's the IOC date?
The IOC for the Navy in the contract is the contract end of EMD, which is the goal is to be IOC'd in 2024, and or sooner if possible.
And obviously a tremendous amount of work between now and then, including on the Navy side. But I thought it was interesting that you guys said that you've also got simulators that are up and running, so you kind of, you know, get that feedback loop going as well.
Yeah, a great example on our T1 aircraft for this era that we're in right now, where we're beefing up the wing. We went through the effort of pulling the engine intentionally, you know, looking at from a training perspective. That engine pull was the exact same engine pull process that the Navy will be doing in the ship, and so we were able to bring the you know, uniformed folks out, film it, put it as part of our tech pubs, and all of that we wouldn't have been able to do until much later when we had the aircraft sitting on the ramp, the Navy's aircraft. So those are the types of things, and we do that. We did all of that training for our team with a virtual system, so they were on the computer doing the checklist and watching the whole thing come through from a virtual standpoint, so they knew where their eyes should be looking, where the connect points were, and all of that. So it helps in safety, it helps in obviously execution, and we're able to pull that engine out with, you know, as if we'd done it dozens of times, because virtually we have.
And so far, when it comes to deck handling, all of that is moving well as well, because obviously that's one of the longer poles in the tent.
It's certainly important, and you know, as I said, our objective is to be is to be seamless on the carrier deck with the right folks. So what I anticipate is that the team on topside, this is going to be their baby. You know, they're going to be the ones walking this airplane over that catapult. And we're excited about that. And what we're doing is we're listening and working with our Navy counterparts to make sure that we match what they expect in terms of the difficulties or the advantages of how we're pulling this off, with an eye toward safety on the ship. So I think you're right. That's a big deal, and we're really excited about how our deck handling concept is being received.
I think that people have a tendency of forgetting that this airplane is trailblazing the way for future autonomous systems off carrier decks. That once you can solve these big problems, talk to us about how some of the foundational things you guys are developing can go into future platforms, whether they're strike platforms, whether they're reconnaissance platforms that come off of a future carrier deck, because you guys carry quite a lot of cargo, quite a lot of distance, and that bus could be used in a variety of different future ways.
You're certainly correct in that perception. I think the big thing what we're learning is, autonomy is not remotely piloted. So the team on the ground with, that's managing the mission and managing the aircraft, are really, they are enabling the mission by authorizing the airplane to do what it can do. So that back and forth, that learning of how autonomy works in the environment, the carrier environment, is the big opportunity. And as you can imagine, with a warfighting asset, being able to handle the contingencies, the contingencies range substantially from emergency procedures all the way to intentional decisions that the air wing will make in terms of deployments and moving and retasking type decisions. And that's the excitement, and that will pivot. We certainly see autonomy as a huge future enabler, and autonomy that has that safety aspect where there's no doubt that the airplane will do what it's predictably able to do in the contingencies or in the scenarios that it's placed in. And it's a reliable teammate. This is a go to war asset. Being on a strike and getting your gas on the way to the strike, there's nothing more important, and getting your gas and coming back when you need it, nothing more important. And we need to be seen as a trustworthy, reliable, autonomous teammate. And that's the work that we expect will translate to so many other applications in our Boeing future. So that's the excitement of the program. And as you pointed out previously, safely coming aboard the ship reliably. And we expect that to be the hallmark of this airplane. No wave offs, come right aboard very reliably and get out of the foul line. So we're excited.
And obviously you guys are pulling from technology across the Boeing company, from Loyal Wingman to all of the other work that you guys have done over the decades, actually, in this space. Let me ask you two last questions. One, Hondo Gertz is a little bit concerned about the aviation, the supply of aviation components. Obviously, the pandemic has been devastating for airlines as well as aircraft makers like Boeing and Airbus, and has had trickle-down effects to the supplier base, the same supplier base that military aviation is drawing from, which is one of the things that concerns Hondo a little bit. Do you anticipate any impact from the supplier base at all in terms of impacts on your program?
Certainly, so far so good. I think the nearish term impacts that we have seen have been really telecommuting based. The ability to turn a quote. Basically, the virtual office on their side has to coordinate their replies. But so far so good, and we are keeping our finger on that pulse. My supply chain team, real proud of them. They've got great relationships with our suppliers. And as I said, we were coming out of our design review and already running up the throttle on our supply chain and before the virus. So it's been healthy so far, so good.
And let me ask you one final question, which is on Boeing's resources. Obviously, the 737 MAX combined with the virus has been financially devastating for the company. Then there were costs on KC-46 as well, which were underwritten at the time by strong commercial sales. Now those strong commercial sales are no longer there. Is there any concern on your part whether the company is going to have the resources that you need in the event that you get into any challenges to make sure that you ride this through and are able to deliver?
Well, the short answer is not at all. I think we've got certainly the attention and appropriate attention of Boeing defense leadership and corporate leadership. Our program, as well as the other development programs in the company, are fully supported. I get what I need. I'm not sensing any reticence, and certainly while what you said is certainly impactful in the near term and has been, it's not the type of impact that slows down our development. In fact, we view this program as essential, and it's in our long-term plans and will remain there. So I think so far so good, and no indications along the lines you just suggested at all.
Dave, thanks so much for spending so much time with us. All the best to you, yours, and your team, and fair winds following seas, and looking forward to staying in touch as you guys continue to execute what is truly a trailblazing program. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for the time. I really enjoyed it.
And thanks for joining us. Please follow our daily interviews with top government, military, industry, and thought leaders at Defense and Aerospace Report, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Follow us on Twitter at DEFAERO Report. That's at DEFAERO Report. Like us on Facebook at Defense and Aerospace Report, and check us out on LinkedIn. And check out our weekly cyber report sponsored by Northrop Grumman. For more than 80 years, Bell has pushed past the boundaries of what's possible to drive aviation forward, going above and beyond flight. Bellflight.com. Thanks again to Bell for their generous sponsorship, and we'll see you again tomorrow.